let's talk, first of all, Ilana, about bias in AI. Can you, and you may only use 2 sentences for this.
Oh, no.
Can you help me define by what we mean by bias when we talk about bias in AIs?
It's very hard to keep this consolidated to 2 sentences, so I will do my best.
Thank you.
But generally speaking, when we talk about bias, we're describing an unintended outcome of a system that has a disproportionate impact against a specific population. And that could be a bias relating to how images are generated and how people are represented in those images. It could be a bias indicating a preference towards certain minority groups or certain subsets when pricing or offering certain types of services. It could also be a bias with respect to how information is represented. So who can use a certain type of a system or what value they'll get out of the use of a particular type of system. But all of that is inherently disparate. It's a disparate impact.
So we're talking about bias, to use the technicalism, at the point of inference. So we're talking about things coming out of an AI that are biased, but actually that bias, as I understand it at least, is baked in earlier. So are we talking about bias that is inherent in the body of learning, which is then manifest when people query? Is that what we're talking about?
Essentially, yes. We observe bias at the point of inference when you're actually using a system. But bias becomes embedded into a system, not just at that point of inference. It's from the data, how that data was collected, who that data is collected about, what type of information is being fed, what it's reflecting, when it was collected. All of that has bias embedded within it. But there's also bias in how you design a system. What's the function of it? Who are you trying to serve? What's the appropriate type of outcome that you're trying to see there? There are biases that could be embedded in decisions around what type of systems you choose to design or how you choose to design those systems. And then there's bias in how that information is then served out of that model, which can influence who can access it or how they can interface with these systems. And there is a bias represented in that type of experience as well. So when we talk about removing or mitigating biases from an AI, we need to think about the whole life cycle of an application and really try and understand what we can do, what we can control across that ecosystem, and also really what we mean by bias in that particular use case so that we have actionable items that we can actually take.
So it can start at data collection and it can continue through any data that you might pass to your AI engine during its use. And that can be manifest in, when we talk about biased output, let's talk about how that is manifest. Are we talking about poisonous language? Are we talking about racist output? Are we talking about inaccurate figures that might damage the business? Are all these true? And are these have I named just a few of the dangers maybe that bias in AI might offer us?
Yes, it's just a few. And this is why it's helpful, I think, to think about a particular use case or implementation of a system. Because when you describe it so generally, it seems like an overwhelming, taxing problem, can't possibly solve for all of these different things. But let's take an image recognition model, right? Well, let's say the purpose of the system is to categorize images of parts into different buckets for manufacturing facilities. So very narrow use case. You might be using any type of a variety of model you're going to available. That won't, obviously, you won't be seeing a racial discrimination because you're categorizing
widgets.
Auto parts or widgets, whatever it is. But there could still be biases in there because the model could still be designed based on a subset of information that doesn't reflect its entire intended performance. Maybe it could be was trained on parts, and I'm making up this use case on the fly here, so it might not be perfect, but maybe it's trained on parts from one manufacturing facility, but it's applied to systems that are across a wide variety of manufacturing facilities. Or maybe part of it is trying to detect potential safety concerns and seeing if like a hand is present in the image and therefore to force a stop of the system. Is it actually looking at different skin tones or different formulations of other appendages that could be present within the systems? So you have to think, what is this use case? What am I actually using the system for? What do I mean by bias? Is it a human bias? In which case, how am I observing it? What's the outcome that we might see? Can I measure it? If it's not a human bias, is there still some other type of systemic bias that we need to consider? Or even if it's going to be used by people and they're making decisions based off of it, do they feel like they have the appropriate training to even make decisions off of that, which is in itself also a bias. So it's a challenging problem, but it's difficult to solve in the abstract. You have to think tactically about and one narrow use case.
And to me, as someone who works with language all the time, the word bias is almost replaceable by error. But of course, in the context of AIs, it's not going to be wrong or biased every time. And in fact, you might never come across a scenario in which the bias is manifest, the error is manifest. So we're almost using the word bias as it's wrong occasionally. It might be wrong on occasions that really matter. Have I got that right? So it's the possibility of temporary error is how I would define bias.
That is one manifestation of bias for sure. There are others which are a bit more impacted by circumstance, where individuals might have not been equitably treated in the past, and that's the information that's being passed to a model, and it's representing that same type of treatment again and again.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that the previous treatment was accurate. It was more an artifact of the systems and structures that resulted in those decisions. So would you call that an error? Not necessarily, because mathematically it's what had happened.
It's perfect.
It's what had happened before.
Yeah.
But that is not necessarily the circumstance you want to perpetuate going forward. And so I think we do need to look at true erroneous consequences where we're misidentifying things, or providing really discriminatory outputs, or there's some type of a harm that is not that's being manifested by the use of this type of AI system, and maybe the lack of human involvement. But we also have to think about any type of perpetuation of biases that could be endemic within the data that we're using.
And so, are we best suited then, in order to try and be as clean and unbiased, and almost starting from a clean slate, are we then best advised to create our own models? Or if I was a business, I would create my own model specific to a particular use case using training data that I have access to and can sanitize, for want of a better word, before it's passed to the training model? Or is that far too resource intensive, typically, depending on what I want to do? Is that too typically resource intensive for businesses to do? And so therefore they're kind of left with an off-the-shelf AI, which they can download a llama model or what have you. I mean, which is the best way forward?
Again, difficult to answer that in the abstract because it really depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. So
Yeah.
I'd actually say we need to be relentlessly focused on what does a good outcome look like out of the system that we're using. And then based on that, what's the real business decision we're trying to use to achieve, or customer experience we're trying to achieve? What is that? And then what is the appropriate technology set that will help us do that most effectively? So I think that's number one. So you're sub-selecting from the broad range of AI technologies into whatever type of modality or model would make the most sense.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Then when you're talking about whether or not that needs to be proprietary implementation, or you're using some other type of third party or foundation model, if we're in the language or image model space, the use of a small model might help in some circumstances, but it also could exacerbate some biases because you're overcorrecting on your smaller data set, whereas those models are trained with a really large set of data. So in some respects, they might have broader representation. That's why it's important to think about what is my actual outcome here that I'm trying to achieve. How am I going to measure success? And what does bias actually look like for me in this particular system that I want to try and mitigate? That'll help drive some of those decisions a bit more clearly. And importantly, it'll help us measure and monitor for biases that we don't want to see perpetuate.
Okay. So I've kind of put myself into the boots of a decision maker in an enterprise or business. And I'm almost regarding you as a salesperson trying to, implement an AI for my business. My next question would be, if I implement an AI for a specific use case and we very carefully together choose the model and set up the boundaries in which it has to work, and so therefore we can monitor outcomes and just make sure that things are firing on all cylinders and accurately. I like scalability, and my business is going to grow, and I'm going to be using AI more if this project works. Aren't I constraining my model from the word go, and so therefore it's going to prevent me from reusing it, using it more, and expanding?
Any choice we make in our model development process needs to be taken in combination with what our goals are and what our constraints are.
Oh, and one of our goals might be expansion.
It might be expansion. It might be scalability. It could be some type of a performance consideration. On the risk side, we might be worried about certain types of biases. We might be worried about lack of interpretability. It could be something else. What I'm advocating for is that we have to make those decisions collectively. You can't make them one at a time. You can't build a model that's extremely highly performant and then after the fact say, oh, what am I going to do about bias?
Yes.
Because those decisions need to be made together. Consequently, you can't make a decision about bias that will over-constrain the performance of your system such that it's no longer effective and valuable. So it's a collective decision. We need to be making those decisions with all of the data in our hands. And there are ways to navigate forward with that. If you understand there are certain biases, you can't avoid them, but you need this certain type of a configuration to achieve a certain performance, maybe there is a manual control that could be implemented that would flag when a model is going to do something or awry, or maybe there's a parallel process to collect additional data so that can then be later fed into the model to remediate some of the biases that you see. Which is
what some of the big AI platforms are calling guardrails, which is kind of post-inference, just making sure that there is sanity coming out of the AI.
It's guardrails for sure, and the broad range of guardrails, some of which are technical controls, like some of the larger providers are incorporating, but also procedural controls. You're implementing these models into processes for some type of decision making, usually. What does that process look like? What types of other gates and controls are embedded in there? Honestly, I think the most important thing is even just awareness of the potential problems and consequences, because that drives a collective use in a certain direction of a given application.
Yeah, absolutely.
That awareness is key.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that awareness is key. And it's almost an awareness of, it's not magic.
No.
It's not a piece of technology, if only it were, a piece of technology that you drop into your business and it has all the answers. It's as fallible as we make it, like any piece of software, I mean, my standard line when talking to my parents about technology, and they say, well, it's not working. It should be working. And it's like, well, perhaps that was coded by Bob on Monday morning, and Bob had a hangover and he'd had an argument with his wife, so it probably doesn't work that well. So I think with AI, just to tell you back what you've said to me so that I hope I understand it and you confirm or deny, is that there are going to be issues like there are with any piece of technology. And the more information we have up front and the more planning that we do and the more incisive our target is, the more clearly defined our target, the better our outcomes.
100%. I'd add training to that.
Training of people.
Training of people. We're all users of technology. We're deploying technology for use by other people. They need to be aware of how they can incorporate that tech into their day-to-day workflow in the most effective way and what the limitations of it might be. Without that awareness, we might unintentionally make decisions that contain a bias or even don't achieve our business outcomes as we expect them to.
Okay. Getting to the end of our time now, I want to talk about black boxes. One of the first times I used ChatGPT, I was asking it about whether AI was any good. You know, hey, ChatGPT, are you any good? That sort of, first time you interact with a big model. And what I found was, having sort of iterated on questioning it and carrying on, through deeper and deeper levels of questions, I finally got it to admit that when it talks about artificial intelligence, it always tweaks its output. So it's what it calls, or what it called, more optimistic than normal. So inside the programming, the black box that is ChatGPT from OpenAI, there is a bias so that we're more positive about artificial intelligence in general than, if you like, an average or a mean. Okay, so now we have a black box model, and it's coming to us with bias tweaked into it by engineers, tweaked into it by its programmers, but also with bias inherited better from its training corpus. Is it a better idea to go with something that's open source? I know with open source AI models, you don't get the full learning corpus, so that's more or less impossible. But the more open, the better. The more eyes on, the better. Or should we be going with a kind of black box model and trusting in fate? What's your gut feeling? And I know what you're going to, at least I think I know what you're going to say, which is it kind of depends on the implementation of where it's going to go.
It entirely depends. There are certain circumstances where you might gravitate toward a more open model and the benefits that it affords, especially for large organizations that maybe can sustain their own infrastructure stack.
Yes.
There are other organizations that would not be that, for which that would not be feasible. But I keep coming back to this question of what do you really need this model to do? And is this the right technology for you? And also what does it mean to have a biased outcome? Because the larger models are all designed with a very large training corpus, but they're all tuned with human intervention. That's why we can get the value and the benefit out of them the way that we've been able to experience. And all of those human interventions and experiences are imposing some type of a perspective on the world, which may or may not be a bad thing. It really just has to do with, for the circumstances under which you want to use that system, do those types of tiny corrections actually reflect an outcome that you would want to see out of that system. Many organizations are deploying these models as embedded components within a broader ecosystem. So they're also embedding additional guidance and adjustments on top of these models, prompting or other type of constraints. And you could, from one lens, view that as a bias, but it's really guiding the performance in a certain way. So I think what is more important for us to consider is, what do we want this thing to do for us? What does good look like? Do we have a good concept of that?
Yeah.
Do we have other controls that we're relying upon? And what is it really necessary for us to understand about this thing so that we trust it and incorporate it effectively into our processes?
And it also strikes me as well in that we should be aiming for a particular outcome, but also we should be realistic about the number of components, in that you might have several AIs, and all those AIs will be plugging into an existing infrastructure, and the whole thing needs consideration. It's not like you're buying one thing off the shelf.
No, you're employing AI in many cases to facilitate specific tasks. And it's not just large language models or big generative models. We're talking anything down to a very narrow prediction model that could be used for pricing or for customer marketing.
Or the checking for the bad widgets in the conveyor belt.
Or checking for the bad widgets in the conveyor belt. Right? There are a multitude of different systems. And there are a lot of different decisions that would go into, or considerations that would go into, why you would choose certain technologies versus others. What needs to hang across all of that is a governance system.
Yeah.
How are you inventorying what your use of AI really is? What types of systems are being deployed where? Are they adhering to appropriate checks and balances? Do you even know what those are? That is going to be critical for the effective management of widespread use of AI in organizations. Otherwise, it's very difficult to know what is going on and how these systems are being used. And there would be a potential for unintentional consequences out of those systems because they're not adhering to a common set of controls and practices.
And I think from what you've said then, it seems to be coming down to skilling. It's down to personnel to a certain extent, in that many companies struggle to find the skilled personnel to control governance or to have that governance oversight onto their data in an AI context. And so therefore, this is where, sorry to bring it back to a terribly commercial message, but I think it's a practical point. This is where companies like PwC can come in and kind of bring that expertise and that intellect and that technical capability as well to help companies with this. And it's almost like you're kind of outsourcing part of your brain to professionals who really know what they're doing.
We work with amazing clients in all different spaces that have all degrees of experience when it comes to implementing AI and trying to stand up their programs. And it's one of my greatest joys to support my clients in helping them establish strategies around AI, governance programs around AI. But the benefit is that we're bringing together skill sets across a wide range of experiences to help to meet companies where they're at.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, brilliant. We'll leave it there. Ilana Blumenfeld, thank you very much for joining us today.